the newsagents.
Welcome to a special US edition of Q&A. And here is a voice note from Paul.
Hello, newsagents. I have two questions, if I may. First is, how does the US system work with regards to a leader? If Trump loses, you won't hear of a leadership contest for the Republicans. Can't even say it, Republicans. Does this mean that in all effect, the losing party doesn't have a leader when they're in opposition? Does the US even have an opposition?
Oh, Paul, welcome to the newsagents. You're an honorary newsagent for the gratuitous use of the F word. Well done.
I see. Was that it? I mean, are we just embarrassing Paul? He probably sent like a perfectly crisp version, and we're just choosing to use the
it's
take
the
one.
newsagents.
Yeah, all right. Well, anyway, thank you, Paul. The simple answer is it's a completely different system. So there is no such thing as opposition, really, in American politics. In Congress, there's what they'd say the minority party. You have the majority party that either controls the House or the Senate. You have the minority party. That's probably the closest thing. But given that the presidential cycle only occurs once every 4 years, they have primaries to determine who is going to be that presidential candidate. But there is not a leader of the party in that official sense.
Yeah, and there is no leader of the opposition in US politics. There will be the minority leader, as you say, in the House, and that person at the moment is a Democrat, Hakeem Jeffries, but he is, has an entirely different relationship with Chuck Schumer, who is the majority leader in the Senate, another Democrat senator. And they don't interact. They're in competition with each other. And there is no such thing as the leader of the party. There is only the leader of the party, the flag bearer, after the convention, when you've got enough delegate votes to be the nominee for either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Once the election's over, the losing side, the loser, all bets are off. They can disappear into the mist, or they can try again and have another go to become their party's nominee. But just don't think of US politics as you do a parliamentary system.
And that's partly as well because power is so much more diffuse in American politics as well. In Britain, we talk about the leader of the opposition because we have the House of Commons and all power is kind of centred in Parliament. But in the US, you've got state legislatures, you've got governors, you've got the Senate, you've got the House, you've got the presidential, you've got the presidency. And so you've got all of these different centres of power. So in that sense, there's not really a national party in the way that there is in the UK or in European countries. There are lots of state parties and there's a national committee which, coordinates stuff for Congress and the presidency. But there's not really a kind of national party in that sense.
Yeah, and the other way to think about it is if you think before the UK general election and there were various seats that were unfilled and the party machine imposed candidates in safe Labour seats, in safe Tory seats, wherever they wanted to put preferred people into a prominent position, there is no way that the Democratic or Republican Party would be allowed to do that because the local parties will decide who their candidates are on the basis of their primary system. And it just doesn't happen in the same way as British politics. And again, it's because of the geography. America is 3,000 miles across. It's huge. And it's up to local states, local cities, local counties to decide who their slate of candidates will be.
Well, for an incomplete question, that was a very complete answer.
It was a
complete
answer.
Exactly. Welcome to the newsagents.
It's John.
It's Lewis.
Oh, let's crack on, shall we? The first question. Hello, lads.
They must have known it was just the two of us.
They must have known that Maitlis was...
Emily's the biggest lad going.
I'd love to know the agenda for the USA election. When should I stay up till, set the alarm, etc. Harry.
We should just stay up all night, Harry, obviously.
Yeah,
it's just too exciting.
Cup of coffee, Diet Cokes on the ready, stay up all night.
It's only once every 4 years. Come on. Look, as we both know from debates and other American election events, the time difference is not kind. If you're watching from the UK.
So the first polls that will close are on the East Coast, which will be at 7 p.m, midnight UK time.
And usually get Kentucky and Vermont first, which are utterly predictable, so completely boring, and they call them straight. And that's the other weird thing about American election nights, right? Which is, compared to UK, we in UK election nights, we never call seats
No.
before they're fully counted. It just doesn't work that way. Whereas, American election night, states are called literally the moment that the polling stations are closed, because it's basically all based on projections rather than actual votes counted. Unless you get to the really close and tight states when actually it starts to be about
And
real
you've got
votes.
electronic voting machines which
Yeah.
will give you a tally. And of course, worth saying as well, again, kind of going back to the first answer, different states have different machinery
Yes.
for counting votes.
So Florida is incredibly quick. I mean,
Yeah.
Florida, a huge state, 25, 30 million people. And yet, they count almost, you can basically get 99% of the precincts in within about a couple of hours. And then there are some states, as we remember from last time, Arizona or Pennsylvania, whatever, it can take all week. And that is the other truth about this, which is that, I mean, probably shouldn't say this, but if you really wanted to go to bed and just see where you were in the morning, it's probably not a crazy cycle or crazy election to do that, on the basis that, look, if the polls are anywhere near right, and this is just such a tight race, 5 of the 7 swing states are currently reporting a lead for either Harris or Trump, which is sub 1%, which has basically never really happened before. The closest you'd get is 2004. If those polls are anything near accurate, then the chances are we're in for a 2, 3 day, 4 day, who knows, maybe longer cycle and set of election results.
Yeah, so Harry, last time round, we were waiting for the election result. And of course, actually, what first appears to be the case, it looked like Trump was on course to victory when they declared Florida. Trump's won Florida quite easily. And then it kind of swings back again when Fox News, of all people, call Arizona for the Democrats for Joe Biden. But voting was on the first Tuesday in November. We got the result of Pennsylvania mid-morning Saturday. So it's a long wait to go, and you'll suddenly find yourself interested in all sorts of small counties in America.
Fulton County.
Cobb
County.
Erie County.
County.
In Pennsylvania. All these places you'll take a huge interest in.
We could do like a sort of holiday tour of those counties, couldn't we?
That would be very nice.
When we do the newsagents, travel agents.
Exactly.
We could do swing counties US tours.
Yeah.
Erie, Fulton, Kolb, all the good ones. Okay, so we've got a second question, which is a voice note from Tiffany.
Hello, news agents. This is Tiffany Smiley. I work for the Economist Educational Foundation, and we create lessons for children to discuss the news in classrooms around the world. This week, we're working on a lesson about swing states in the US election. So my question is, how much of an impact can young people and young voters have in the swing states for this election?
Tiffany Smiley. Tinker Tailor Soldier newsagent.
Yeah, Tiffany, great question. We're very happy to help. Where did you record that? It sounded like it was in the sort of most marble of marble bathrooms that you could ever find. It was very...
You jealous?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting question. Can young people have a profound effect in the swing states? Yes, 100%. Totally yes. Because, of course, there are huge numbers of young people. And the issue has been in previous elections, even though that young people may have been fired up by Bernie Sanders or whoever it happens to be, have tended not to vote in the numbers in the same proportion as older generation. And therefore, if younger people turn out to vote, it could have a profound effect. And we've seen the impact that Taylor Swift had when she came out and released her statement on Instagram, calling on young people to register to vote and saying that, make up your own mind, but I've decided I'm backing Kamala Harris. And you get hundreds of thousands of people registering to vote.
Yeah, and there is some anecdotal evidence to suggest that in certain states where early voting is taking place, that young people are turning out in greater numbers than perhaps before, and certainly turning out in greater numbers for early voting than perhaps they have before, not least because the Democrats have been trying to do a huge get out the vote campaign for young people. There was remarkable pictures really from Georgia earlier in the week when early voting opened there, huge queues, doubling early voting at the same period in 2020, which is quite something when you think about it, when you consider how given that the 2020 election was happening during COVID and lots of people did want to vote early and lots of extra postal votes coming through in that same vein. I would just add a note of caution, though, which is we assume that young people voting will help the Democrats. And generally speaking, and historically speaking, that has been true. There is something really interesting and new opening up in terms of polling, in terms of the split between Democrats and Republicans with regards to young voters and regards to voters generally, which is this really significant split between genders, between men and women. And we talk a lot about the potential for Harris to inspire women and young women in particular to turn out. And again, there's some evidence to suggest that's happening. She enjoys a plus 14 split with women voters at the moment. We talk less about the fact that Trump, according to some polls, enjoys a plus 16 split with men, thereby basically negating and indeed slightly outdoing Harris's vote share or vote surplus with women. And indeed, in particular, there is more and more evidence that young men in particular are becoming more attracted to Trump, young black men in particular as well. And so it is a little bit more complicated than just assuming that lots of young people turn out to vote. That helps Harris. It probably does in the round, but it is more nuanced than that.
Yeah, Donald Trump has got a strategy that is clearly going for the bro vote. For the young bro, the kind of athletic, towel snapping, beer chugging, kind of kid,
frat boy,
they're going to vote for Trump. And as you say, young Latino men, young black men, Trump is courting that vote particularly
with all of his influencer pals as well in particular.
And Kamala Harris is doing really well with women. You're absolutely right about what the polling gap for men and women, and it's going to be the most gendered election I think we've ever seen in the US. All I would say in addition is, one, in America there are more women than there are men, and women tend to vote in higher percentage numbers than men do. But just going back to Georgia, which you mentioned a moment ago, I mean, the numbers are staggering. 300,000 plus people voted on day one. Now, that's going to be out of a total poll of about probably 4.5-5 million, which is the number that voted in Georgia last time round, and the margins were, if you remember, kind of less than 12,000 that Biden won by. The young people's vote is really important, and I just think generally, young people, go and vote. This is going to affect your lives. There are issues that are being debated now about abortion, about the economy, about your prospects for jobs, all the rest of it. So, if you are preparing kind of tutorials or whatever it is for your students about the importance of young people and swing votes, super important.
Here's one for you, John, given that you covered it. It's from Meta Hinton. And she says, how is the Trump campaign going compared with 2020 in terms of size, activity, response?
So it's very difficult because of the COVID comparison. It worked to Joe Biden's advantage in 2020 to be stuck in his basement in Wilmington, Delaware, not really going anywhere, not attempting to do rallies. Because Joe Biden at a rally is awful. And Trump initially stayed off doing rallies, but then thought, damn it, this is my superpower. I'm going to go back out on the road. And I went to a number of the rallies in 2020, which sort of breached all sorts of COVID regulations. I think that Trump played into his weaknesses in 2020 of being slightly disorganized, of slightly being chaotic. It was like his presidency had been. He didn't know whether he wanted to defend their policies on COVID or attack their policies on COVID. And it was all over the place. I think that actually in 2024, latterly, it's become all right again as a campaign. But the whole campaign was based on the fact that he was going to be fighting Biden. And then Kamala Harris comes in and you could see, oh, what are we going to do now? We haven't planned for this. They're sort of getting it together. The more Trump talks about Kamala Harris's economic plans, the border, the campaign is going well. The moment Trump starts talking about himself and the election having been stolen in 2020, it goes badly for him. And I think that it's the challenge for his campaign team to try to keep him on the messages that help and stay away from the messages that do him harm.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about Trump's unique abilities as a candidate. And look, they are there, and he has a very peculiar and particular coalition. There can be no denying of that, and he can command the airwaves like no one else. I think there's also a strong argument to say that, if they had a just decent, more regular Republican candidate, this is a cycle which on every level should be very favourable to Republicans. We can see that in the congressional elections and how they're likely to go. Republicans likely to take the Senate, probably retain control of the House. The Biden administration is very unpopular. Harris is basically judged to have got all sorts of big calls wrong, rightly or wrongly, by the American public. Harris is clearly umbilically tied to that, no matter what she does. So on paper, any Republican should be doing well. You can make an argument to say that Trump has a remarkably sticky coalition, considering everything we know about him. You can make another argument to say that another candidate could quite credibly be doing better than he is. And I think there is one sense in which Trump probably prefers campaigning in 24 rather than 20, right? Which is just endemic to what he is like, which is that he is a politician who thrives on oppositional energy, right? He thrives on the sense of being persecuted. He thrives on the sense of throwing stones rather than having something to defend, right? So I think that being in, I'm going back to that kind of first question, being in opposition, quote unquote, being the insurgent, probably a better word to describe him, is something that just kind of suits his energy, his political energy far better.
I also think that it's worth commenting that I think that for all the criticism of Harris, that she has run a risk-averse campaign.
Or increasingly not, appearing on Fox and
yeah,
so on.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's conversely that Trump is running the risk-averse campaign.
Yeah,
he's
very
doing
much.
his rallies, which is kind of playing to the home crowd.
And he's turning up on very friendly interviews and all that sort of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And he is also aware, or his campaign team are aware, of the potential downsides of the Trump campaign.
No second debate.
So, exactly. So it's Trump that looks like the timorous beastie.
I agree.
In this campaign, not Harris. And I think that is a big difference to 2020, where he thought he had an amazing record to defend. And the American people have just got sick of the noise of what it was like being part of a Donald Trump presidency. It works to his advantage that he's been out of power for the past 4 years.
Question here from Noel, which I think it will be quite easy to answer. Noel Hartman. What would be the outcome of the US election if UK voters were casting the ballots instead?
I think it would be
50 states.
Yeah, 50 states. It would be a landslide victory for Kamala Harris, except Clacton.
What would its nickname? The fairground states, the Pier state. No, well, we know the answer to this because there's polling on it now and again. YouGov or whoever, poll British people as to how they will vote, and it's like 70-30. And this is another little example, just on a slight tangent. This is another little example of actually how far removed the Conservative Party has come on certain elements from actually where the kind of middle of the British public are on lots of issues, right? Because the average British person, again, we know this, not me saying this, we know this from all the polling, the average British person thinks Trump is a mad blowhard, basically. They just think that he's not suitable, for all sorts of reasons. They thought that in 2016, they thought it in 2020, they still think it now, they probably think it even more now. And they're, like a lot of Europeans, worried about what it would mean for European security, rightly. But the Conservative, you see all of these sort of senior members of the Conservative Party, including someone like Robert Jenrick, basically saying that they would plump for Trump, as it were. And it just
There's
sort of shows. We're plumping for Trump. Donald, I'm available. And it's just a little sort of vignette or an example, really, of the extent to which sort of Conservative Party opinion has become quite eccentric from where most British people are, because most British people don't think much of the guy.
I also think there's a historic thing that British people we love to love a US president, but we love the US presidents that feel sort of European rather than American. So Obama felt European, that's nice. George W. Bush felt very American, kind of his good old boy.
Well, there's the thing about Trump is, I always thought, more than anything else, his personality is so un-British, right? He's so showy. He's so, he boasts all the time. He's so flash. There is nothing remotely kind of understated about him, right? And that, as you say, that is very American, right? But it is just the sort of things that puts British people on edge, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, it's not even about his politics. I mean, it's partly about his politics, but it's about his personality.
But I was always interested that I think we quite like George H.W. Bush as a president because he was and he was a decent public servant. He was clearly intelligent, whereas his son George W.
What did
Bush.
people think of Reagan at the time? I obviously wasn't alive, John. So you,
God, don't say that.
No, but I'm genuinely interested.
Reagan was seen.
I know he was seen as a bit sort of old and senile, and maybe maybe a bit past it, but what was...
He was a great communicator.
But
It was also seen as the Reagan-Thatcher axis.
Yeah, I suppose.
I mean,
that's right.
was the special relationship ever more special than during the Reagan-Thatcher years? Even though an awful lot of people, but Britain was pretty split about Thatcher, and they were pretty split about Reagan because they thought he was a warmonger and he was trying to confront the Soviet Union.
Even though in the end he was the one confronting Détente.
Yeah, exactly. And for all that the special relationship was never more special than with Reagan and Thatcher, the invasion of Grenada, which was part of the British Commonwealth, was seen as absolutely horrifying.
Well, the Queen was very upset.
Queen was very upset, and Thatcher hadn't been consulted about it. Reagan had given her no warning at all.
Have you ever heard the clip? The Reagan Library unveiled or published the phone call between Reagan and Thatcher.
Hello, Margaret Thatcher, yes?
If I were there, Margaret, I'd throw my hat in the door before I came in.
Oh, no, there's no need to do that.
Listen, we regret very much the embarrassment that's been caused you, and I'd just like to tell you what the story is from our end.
It's him just phoning up a little bit gingerly and sheepishly, sort of apologising for the whole thing. Thatcher a little bit icy, but then she said, "Oh, Ron, how's Nancy?" It's just great. It's lovely. Lovely to hear.
We'll be back after the break, after that little diversion into history. But Noel, thank you very much for your question.
Right, welcome back. We've moved on from the US invasion of Grenada in 1986, and we're going to have a voice note instead. Finger on the pulse, as ever on the newsagents. We're going to have a voice note instead from Daniel Woodrow.
My question is regarding what would happen if Donald Trump lost the election but refused to accept the result, which is something he's alluded to many, many times. I know that there are very real concerns about incitement and protest and violence, but in terms of practically changing the result and challenging it, what mechanisms are open to him to do that, please? And does it ultimately end up in a Supreme Court that he has had a big hand in, ultimately deciding whether he is president or not? And also, how many Republicans do you think would secretly breathe a sigh of relief if he lost, knowing that they had a chance to reset the party and take it back in a different direction? Thanks ever so much for all the brilliant coverage. You're always amazing, but it's like an election is your Olympics or your World Cup and you're at peak form. It's absolutely brilliant listening to you, and I really appreciate everything you do. Thank you.
Oh, Daniel, thank you. What a lovely question.
Yeah, lovely.
And a really interesting question as well. So, one, will Republicans breathe a sigh of relief? Hell yes. The support for Trump is very thin in the people that really, really love Trump. There are a few. There are a few in the House, there are a few in the Senate who really adore Donald Trump. Most of them know they have to kind of bend the knee to him, kiss the ring, because he is so powerful in the country and could end their political careers by saying, this one is a bad one, you don't want him as your senator or your congressman anymore. So they will be an enormous sigh of relief. You'll be able to hear it across the Atlantic. As to the more substantive point, I think that Donald Trump is in a position to cause less mischief this time round than he was in 2020, when, of course, he was still in the White House. He delayed calling out the National Guard when there was the unrest at Congress. He could have brought that to an end much more quickly. He had the Justice Department under his control. He fires the Attorney General, puts in somebody more sympathetic in the hope that they could alter the kind of, the way the votes have been counted. I don't think he's got that ability this time. But yeah, the courts are skewed very much in Donald Trump's favour. If there are closely fought contests where it goes to the Supreme Court, and remember what happened in Florida in 2000, where it was the Supreme Court that was judging on about 600 votes in Florida, which was the fulcrum on which the election swung. The Supreme Court could play a role.
Yeah, and I think that's the key bit. I think that's the thing that people forget, that the reason why 2020, there are lots of reasons why the sort of attempt to subvert the election outcome didn't work. One of the reasons is because ultimately it wasn't that close. It was sort of close in the sense the margins in particular states were close, but Biden won in enough states by a clear enough margin that even if some of the court cases had been successful from Trump, it wouldn't have altered the outcome. The nightmare scenario this time is that it's so close, it is a Florida 2000 type situation, and it ends up in courts which have been delegitimized, and either way, the election outcome appears to be even less legitimate, and that either way, the outcome of the election is just thrown into a legitimacy crisis and a constitutional crisis potentially. And of course, you throw into that mix as well the fact that one of the other things that kept the show on the road were a lot of very, entirely proper, honest election officials, often from the Republican Party in red states in places like Georgia. Many of those people have been removed by the MAGA machine now because a litmus test of basically being part of the MAGA machine is whether you accept the big lie, which is exactly why, right up to and including the vice presidential nominee himself, J.D. Vance, he will not accept that Trump completely lost that election in 2020.
Look, it is a potentially dangerous moment for American democracy. What happens not up to November the 5th, but what happens after November the 5th about whether there is going to be acceptance. Because I don't care what the result is. I think the chances of Donald Trump picking up a telephone and saying, Kamala Harris, congratulations on winning the presidency, I concede defeat, are precisely 0.00%.
Bear in mind as well, in 2020, the Democrats controlled the House. Pelosi was Speaker. Mike Johnson, who is the Speaker, the Republican Speaker, if he wants to again basically say to Republican officials they shouldn't certify the election, which is ultimately how the election gets decided in Congress, that has to be certified by both chambers of Congress, there will be tremendous pressure on Mike Johnson and his caucus not to do it. So there are lots more frailties, I would say, in the system at this time, although I agree, John, because he's not president, at least he doesn't have the power of that office. But it's a dangerous moment. And that in itself, the very fact that we talk about American presidential elections these days as kind of a inflection point, dangerous moments, that itself is a sobering thing. And it's basically entirely down to him.
I mean, you go, just to finish up with this point, and you go back to Al Gore in 2000 accepting the result, accepting that George W. Bush had won by this narrow few hundred votes. It was highly contentious, it was highly emotional, it was highly charged, but he accepted. This time round, if it's that, and it's Donald Trump that has just lost, not a chance.
And of course, if he wins, there will be no question whatsoever about the probity.
Yes,
it's extraordinary, isn't it? Extraordinary.
But that was clear in the run-up to the 2020 election. If he wins, it's a fair election. If he lost, it's been stolen from him.
I know. A question from Maurice. Who is Donald Trump's successor as the Republican presidential nominee if he loses to Harris? Reese, certainly in Donald Trump's mind, I think that's very simple. It'll be Donald Trump. At the very least, he will... obviously, he might be in prison or mired in yet more legal cases, but he won't accept the election, and he'll maintain that he should have been president, at least for the next couple of years. Whether he actually runs again is another question, but I think what is absolutely certain, let's imagine he stays out of prison or is able to do so by whatever means, and he loses the election. On one level, it could be J.D. Vance, because he's the VP pick and he's kissed the ring and he's done all he can to try. That's what he's got in mind, one way or the other. He wants to be the successor to the MAGA crown, whether that is as an incumbent vice president or as the VP nominee from last time. But it's very clear, I'm sure Trump will basically operate an apprentice-style type tournament. Basically, they'll all have to go to Mar-a-Lago. They'll all have to kind of pay homage to the great man. He'll keep everyone in great suspense. And whoever if he decides not to run again in that circumstance and he stays out of prison, whoever he anoints gets it.
Yeah, and regarding Donald Trump running again, he said he won't. So that's it.
Well, he says
he said he won't, and he would be 83.
I know.
So I don't think that's likely. Don Jr. is playing an ever more important role in Republican politics. The one thing I would say is, even if it's not Trump, it will be someone who is Trumpian.
Totally.
The Republican Party is in the thrall still of MAGA. I'm
it's
sure
not
a lot
back
of the
to the
same
Bush years. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Nikki Haley might think she's got a reasonable chance. I think that Donald Trump would have to go down in flames. Really be a catastrophic defeat, which the polling evidence says is not going to happen, for Nikki Haley to stand a chance next time round. There are kind of senators like Josh Hawley from Missouri who would think I might have a chance of this. There'll be J.D. Vance who will want to have a go. And then, of course, there are the people who are nothing to do with politics, like Vivek Ramaswamy, who, was running for the Republican nomination, but who's just a business guy. And, Donald Trump had no political background. Elon Musk for president. Oh,
President Musk. Sounds like a sort of really cheap perfume. Would you like a bottle of President Musk?
I really wouldn't.
Oh, it's quite acrid, isn't it?
Yes. No, let's move on. That thought is upsetting me. Mark Burnley asks this question. Why is the bar on campaign performance set so low for Trump and so high for Harris. That is, Trump can say and do things that would end a campaign every single day. But the slightest hint of awkwardness from Harris is seen as a disaster. The media's fault or structural racism, sexism?
I do think, just actually to preface it, I do think Harris, the way that she's talked about, particularly by some sort of commentators and journalists, I think that she is kind of underestimated. I think she is far more impressive, actually, generally speaking, than often she gets credit for. I think she demonstrated that on the Fox News interview that she did this week. But in terms of whether the different bars are about sexism and racism, I mean, I think that's just more about Trump and everyone else.
Yeah.
I mean, the truth is that's always been the case for every opponent that Trump has ever encountered. I mean, the same with Biden, right? I mean, Trump often sounds completely deranged. I mean, completely deranged, full of his speech, full of kind of non sequiturs, don't go anywhere, his sentences don't go anywhere. He, just like Biden in lots of ways, he does it more bombastically for sure. And the decline with Biden was more rapid, but Trump's always been like that. Does he get treated the same way? Is his age as much of an issue? No, it's not. Same thing with all of his Republican primary opponents, dozens of them that he's bested over the years. Many of the things that if they had said would have ended their campaigns. Look, there is just something particular about his political personality. He doesn't attempt to hide it. He doesn't have hypocrisy, right? That is the thing. Our trade, journalism, often works basically on hypocrisy. It's about pretending or finding or exposing a politician, pretending to be something that they're not. Trump doesn't have that in the same way. I mean, he is a hypocrite in all sorts of ways, but because he's so brazen about it, it almost becomes harder to interrogate him for it. So in a way, I think it's Trump versus everyone else rather than Trump versus Harris.
Someone came up with the comment in the 2016 election that the American public take Trump seriously, but not literally, whereas American journalism took him literally, but not seriously. And I think that is such a shrewd comment, because Donald Trump is treated differently. The laws of political gravity do not apply to Donald Trump in the way that they do to every other political candidate.
But why do you think that is? Is that because of how we treat him, or is it because of something about him? Because in a way, someone listening to this might think, well, that's not very satisfactory.
Because the American public knew Donald Trump for 20, 30 years. The huckster, the playboy, the kind of, property magnate, the loose morals, fast women, la la la.
That's what I mean about the hypocrisy thing.
And so they just know. So when, Donald Trump kind of boasts about, I haven't paid my taxes, people think, yeah, good old Donald, I wish I could get away with doing that.
Well, it's because he shrouds himself. Even now, I'm still amazed when we were in Indiana in the summer, the number of people who still say things like, he's not a politician. It's like, hello, this is his third run, arguably his fourth run. He's been in politics like for 12 years, longer. He's been talking about it for 30 years. Like, he's so a politician. But because his shtick still is that he's not a politician, I think that is part of the reason that as you say, the laws of political gravity don't apply, because he sets himself apart from it, so people don't treat him in that way.
I was in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Spartanburg,
yeah, it was great name, huh? In the run up to the 2016 election, and this woman, I asked her, why do you love Donald Trump? And she said, he says what I'm thinking, but I'm not allowed to say. And I think that there is something about Donald Trump as a rule breaker that people love about him, that he doesn't care about any of the conventions of political niceties. He uses language that you should.
It's a Jeremy Clarkson thing, but times 100.
Yeah, exactly. And he gets away with it. And that is why. And yeah, is it frustrating for journalists that, things that would normally sink another candidate just leave him untouched? Of course.
So Matt in Bristol has this final question. The question I have relates to Trump winning. Assuming he does get over the line, what positives do you see on the horizon? Does it provide Starmer some much needed political cover to move closer to the EU? Does it mean the EU being forced to work closer together, harder, smarter to resist Putin and support Ukraine?
Well, it's an interesting question, Matt. Thank you for that. I think that Britain will psychologically, just the British establishment, if such a thing exists, will find it hard to move away from the United States of America. I think it has always seen that the transatlantic relationship, when push comes to shove, is the most important thing in geopolitical terms. It would be a massive reappraisal to suddenly think, right, well, we don't care what America thinks, we just care about Europe. And you just look at the psychology of kind of, from the Second World War onwards, we have lent towards America. And even when we were in the European Union, we were the sort of bridge between Europe and the United States. So, I mean, look, we'll have to do much more in terms of defence, because if America says, right, we're out of NATO because we just think that European countries aren't spending enough on it, then that would be a profound shock to the system. I think Sama will do his utmost to try and make the relationship work if Trump is president.
I mean, what that first meeting will be quite something. I mean, Starmer. Hello, Keir. Heard a lot about you.
But it was like the first meeting between Trump,
weird Keir.
Yeah, between Trump and Theresa May. I mean, two less likely soulmates. It was hard to imagine, and they sort of just about kind of soldiered on.
Yeah, just about. I think you're right. I think it's out of sheer necessity, if nothing else. I don't think it's just psychology about our links to the US. I think it's the fact is that American military prowess, technology, geopolitical heft is just so utterly irreplaceable and indispensable in European terms. Like, Europe can't compete. I mean, if Europe really got its act together and really, say 4 years ago or to 8 years ago, when Trump first got in, had wanted to kind of up military spending in that way, really want to up our capabilities, we might now be in a position to, not compete, but be in a somewhat better position than we're in. But actually, one of the things that's amazed me over the past few years is the extent to which, even though slowly but surely the kind of spectre of Trump has loomed larger and larger as a possibility of a Trump restoration, we've still been pretty sleepy in Europe about it. We still haven't really had a serious conversation on a European level about what rearmament would mean, about sort of upping our strategic capability. It has been happening a bit around the edges, but not to the extent that it would have to do. So I think that there would be certainly a rhetorical push from Europe and the UK to sort of say, okay, to up that reset they've been talking about a lot, that what unites us in Europe is stronger, it's a time to bind together and so on. But whether our capability of actually doing it is there, I'm just not sure. So I think you will just see a lot of European leaders trying to do what they did before, which is to try and, wherever they can, persuade Trump of the merits of the maintaining of the European American alliance.
And also, just on sort of defence, national security, we're a nuclear power. The nuclear weapons that are in our Trident nuclear submarines come from America. Nearly a lot of the weaponry that is being used by the British Army or the Air Force is from the US. There are thousands of British servicemen and women who are serving in American regiments as we speak. That is where the special relationship is real. On intelligence sharing, on defence, on national security, it is absolutely fundamental to Britain's whole posture. It would be dramatic. Just think of the Five Eyes Agreement. You think of, GCHQ, and that it's a listening post for the US as well. That would be a really profound change. And I just don't see it happening, whoever is the next president.
I hear you're a big friend of Taylor Swift here. Not good. Not a big fan.
Taylor and I are very, very close.
I hear you see her a lot. Got a lot of tickets.
Okay, let me put Lewis Goodall back
to bed.
In his box.
We'll have time for one more question right after this. Right, final question from Keith Fitz. And it is a simple one, John. So come on, right now, gun to your head, who do you think will win?
It's too close to call. It's going to be on a knife edge. It will go down to the wire. Are there any more? Are there any more cliches? Give me more cliches. Give me more cliches. I wonder. I mean, I wouldn't. If I had to put 20 quid on something, I'd put 20 quid on Harris
and 20 quid on Trump.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll definitely win.
I just think that maybe goes back to an earlier question that we had about young people's vote. I wonder whether the young people's vote is going to be more significant this time round, and maybe that tips the scales slightly for Harris. But it's so tight, and it's about getting out the vote. It's about all of those small, little incremental things of political machinery that will decide this.
I mean, genuinely, when it's this tight, I mean, literally, like, the weather could swing it.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. I mean, I've thought for a while now. I wrote a piece in the Eye about it this week that I've had this feeling that Trump was going to win because, not least because of Harris's problems with Latino votes in particular and black men. And if you were to put a gun to my head, I would probably still just about say that now. But it's really difficult. And there is absolutely the prospect, as you say, John, that there is something, as ever, a bit like we all assume that the polling can't anticipate Trump's coalition. It's possible that would be the case with Harris as well, because she doesn't talk a lot about it, but she is an historic candidate a very different candidate, even though she's part of the administration. So it is possible. But we've hedged our bets there between us. One of us is right.
You have lent a little bit towards Trump, and I.
Well,
have
no,
lent...
I was saying Trump. Yeah.
No, you've lent a little bit towards
bit.
Trump winning, and I've lent a tiny bit towards Harris winning. But again, can I say too close to call one more time? Or not?
Too close to call. Key race alerts, as our colleagues on CNN would say. Yeah, too close to call. Too early to call as well. Way too early.
Yeah, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
On Monday. Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.